Absolute Reality. A First-Hand Walk with the Divine. Chapter 1, How It Began. October 6, 2015 started off like any other day in my life. I woke up in the same, small empty apartment that I had lived in for over 3 years. I really despised this place, but due to a tornado in 2011, which nearly demolished the place I truly considered home, I was forced to move out. I was certainly not proud of this diminutive dwelling in any way, shape or form. In fact, this suffocating, claustrophobic place was one of the many things in my life that was getting to me and grinding me down on a daily basis. It was like having my own personal jail cell, both in its restrictive size and the fact that I couldn't seem to escape from it. As I lay in bed with the curtains still drawn, dread quickly began to consume me as I thought about facing the day. Over the past few years, I felt as if I was living my life in vain, and most of the days seemed to be quite pointless to me. Whatever I did, it appeared to have no real significance on my life, and the outcome was always the same. It's not like I was lacking in ambition or dreams, far from it in fact. However, every time I tried to pursue them, there seemed to be more and more obstacles placed in my way. This created an overwhelming sense of frustration and hopelessness in me, not to mention the depression that accompanied it. After an hour or so of procrastination, I finally mustered up the energy to get out of bed and get ready for the day. As I went for my morning walk, I looked across at the playground that lay between the cold and forbidding apartment complexes that made up my neighborhood. As I did so, I could see some of the local children playing and soaking up the last few decent days of warm weather. The winters in these parts are harsh, and soon the frigid temperatures of winter would begin gradually creeping in. The last remnants of summer lingered on at this point though, so I stopped for a moment to observe them. Their innocence and utter joy intrigued me. The only things they had to worry about were making it home before dark and whether to play tag or tug of war. I tried to put myself in their shoes and imagine myself in this childlike ecstasy, but I just couldn't do it. You see, while they were playing pretend, I was facing a different type of war, one that was all too real. Since moving into my own place, I had pondered upon my life many times, trying to figure out in which direction it was going. Yet despite years of reflection and numerous attempts at trying to establish some defined path, I couldn't seem to get any traction, so to speak. I came to the realization that I didn't actually have a direction. I didn't really know who I was, what I wanted to be, or my purpose on earth. After so many years of soul-searching, it dawned on me that I had been wandering aimlessly and my life was going around in circles. I felt desperate and knew I had to change something. The problem was, though, I didn't know what to change, how to change it, or even if it was within my capability to do so. I was exhausted from trying to provide a rational solution to this dilemma, and it was something that plagued me day after day. I couldn't believe how hard it was to find an answer to something that affected my life on such a massive scale. My day continued to be a regular, normal day until around 6 o'clock in the evening, when I decided to take a nap and recharge my batteries. As I was lying in bed, the depression and frustration began building up inside me again. With nothing else to occupy my mind in the quiet of the room, I found myself asking the same old questions that had circulated inside my head for the past decade. Yet again, I failed to find the answers I was so vigorously seeking. I have always been a good problem solver, but I just couldn't figure this one out. I didn't even remotely know what to do next in regards to changing my life. It was then that I decided to ask God, if He existed, for help. This was not unusual for me. I had asked God for help many times in the past, but most of my prayers went unanswered. I would just have that usual, one-sided conversation that most people are very familiar with when it comes to praying. I was used to the silence that followed my questions or requests and had grown very familiar with feeling ignored. So although I was hoping for an answer, I in no way anticipated one. However, today was slightly different. Over the past 3 years, I had begun to doubt everything that I had been taught to believe in. This was basically because none of it was working in my life. I was beyond frustrated, not with just myself but the world in general. I had always been a very caring person and often helped others before myself, yet where was my reward and why had my life not changed? Old sayings like hard work pays off seemed to be nothing more than comforting words that didn't hold any truth, or at least not in my case. I honestly didn't know what to believe anymore, especially when it came to God. If there was any truth to anything, or a standard in which to live by, I desperately needed someone to let me know. Therefore I decided to start from scratch. I set aside everything I thought to be true and cleared all of my beliefs from my mind. I did this because I wanted to know the real truth, not what my parents, my church or my teachers had decided to tell me. I was in a lot of mental anguish, and if I was to keep going, I needed a miracle fast. God, I said, I've tried everything I can think of to give my life some meaning and purpose, but nothing seems to change. I still have yet to find any real happiness or peace in my endeavor. If you're up there, please let me know what I'm doing wrong and show me the way. At the very least, point me in the right direction. It was then that I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. A peace unlike anything I have ever felt before. All fear, worry and doubt dissolved from my mind, and it was only that moment that had any importance. It was as if the world suddenly drifted away and vanished from my senses. I was no longer aware of this reality or any of the problems associated with it. As amity penetrated my soul, time seemed to stand still and everything fell silent. This silence was not the same kind of silence that you would experience in life. This was true silence, both mentally and physically, without any distant noises or background hum. I knew I was experiencing something very unfamiliar, but I didn't quite know what it was. In hindsight, the best way I can describe it is that my conscience and God's became one, yet also operated independently. However, I was not initially aware of this during the experience. I just knew that something very unusual and very special was occurring. Just as I was trying to figure out and get used to these new surroundings, the silence was broken by a voice. Joshua. There is normally nothing too unusual about someone saying your name, but this was completely different. This wasn't auditory, like when you speak to a friend and you know you're just hearing them through your ears as they speak. This voice appeared in my head, as though it had gently drifted telepathically into my thoughts. This intrusion should have alarmed me, scared me even, but instead I felt great comfort at its arrival and welcomed it there. The first thing I noticed was that I was being addressed by my full name, Joshua. Yes, my name is Joshua, but nobody calls me that. I have always been known as just Joshua. In fact, the few people that I have a close relationship with choose to call me by some unfortunate nicknames. My mother calls me Jez and my brothers call me Irma. I have only been called Joshua a handful of times throughout my life, and these were by people of authority, like teachers calling roll on the first day of school or a doctor addressing me for the first time. In other words, anyone who knows me well knows that I prefer to be called Josh, not Joshua. It was at that point that I began to realize that this was not my imagination. After all, why would my imagination choose to call me by a name I only heard a half a dozen of times? This soft and beautiful voice seemed to have the characteristics of both male and female in terms of its tone, but was not auditory. The voice blended perfectly and harmoniously, creating a sound that was truly a pleasure to experience. I somehow knew, deep in the bottom of my heart, that this had to be the voice of God. It was too serene to belong to any normal person. I waited in the silence, hoping that the voice would speak again and say something more than my name this time. Whilst I waited, I realized just how dark this place was. I couldn't see anything. If I could have put my hand in front of my face, it would still have been engulfed by the blackness that surrounded my conscience. Why would God live in such a dark environment? I didn't know. However, I wanted to find out. As I tried to come to terms with this new reality, I quickly discovered that this blackened void was not as empty as I had first thought. Something was constantly there. I couldn't see or hear it, but I could feel it all around me. In a normal situation, being in the pitch black with an unknown person or entity would be terrifying to anyone. However, I was not frightened. I felt nothing but overwhelming warmth of peace and love. I could sense that what I was feeling was God's consciousness. It felt separate from me, yet paradoxically, and I felt it radiating through every fiber of my being. I knew it was intrinsically linked to my own consciousness in some way, although I am yet to fully understand how. Once I realized I was in the presence of God, I decided to speak. This is when my conversation with the divine really began. Chapter 2, Who is God? Who are you? I asked. In my heart, I already knew that this was in fact the creator and origin of all life. However, I wanted the confirmation as well as a solid definition from God himself. Immediately after I asked this question, I felt myself become hyperconscious. It was as if my conscience was drawn into that of God's at lightning speed and we were unified. My awareness was at unfathomable heights in which all communication was done by thought rather than through voice. At this point, I was completely severed from the real world with no knowledge of what was going on in my bedroom or just outside the window. This new place was the only place that was real and the only time that existed was the present. My conscience was in an entirely different reality, one that was more authentic and genuine than the reality in which we live in on Earth. This state of heightened awareness was a sensation I had never felt before and seemed to penetrate the very core of my being. It was all-consuming warmth that brought me more alive than I have ever been. I can only describe it as the feeling of absolute love, knowledge and perfection permeating endlessly. Every sensation, every thought, was somehow more powerful and more genuine. Suddenly, the voice answered me. Also, although my surroundings were completely black at first, I soon realized that I could be anywhere or see anything by simply thinking about it. Since I did not think of any particular thing or place when I initially entered this reality, it makes sense that my surroundings would mimic that and be dark as darkness is associated with nothingness. The ability to do anything or be anywhere was a very liberating sensation. Joshua, I am unconditional love and love is everything. The voice appeared deep in my mind like it had been telepathically sent from God's conscience directly to mine. Although our minds were one, they could also operate independently on an individual basis. This method of communication was alien to me, but at no point was I frightened. I knew instinctively that this was God. However, this wasn't the answer I was hoping for. I wanted to hear the words "I am God." I also wanted God to define himself in fine detail, but asking God to elaborate was not as easy as it sounds. In fact, I soon learned that God didn't elaborate on his answers. They were as brief as possible, always short, concise and simple. These short answers meant that I was constantly left with a thirst for knowledge. As my interaction with him continued, I became amazed by the fact that he rarely failed to answer my ever-growing list of questions. In fact, as you will see by the contents of this book, he told me almost everything that I wanted to know. Does that mean you're God? I asked. I am everything. So regardless of what one may call me, it is always partially right. I am the source of all knowledge, truth and love. I am unconditional love, a love that is endless. He replied. Okay. Can you define unconditional love, please? I persevered. Love is who I am, Joshua. It's because of love that you and everything else can and does exist. I see. I said, a little puzzled. So we have come to exist because of you and you are unconditional love. Surely then, this means that we too are also love? Yes. You are part of me and therefore you are also love, God clarified but refused to embellish on any details. Okay, I guess that's simple enough. I answered. However, a lifetime of unanswered questions were bubbling up inside me and I knew I simply couldn't ignore them. So that explains the existence of love in our world. It doesn't explain the existence of hate though. And what about the other negative emotions we experience on Earth, like jealousy, envy, fear and greed? If we all start from absolute love, where do these things come from? Love and only love has the ability to create. Here in the absolute, my love is unipolar, but the love that is present in your world has limits. Due to these limits, it can create nice things like happiness as well as others seemingly bad feelings like hatred, jealousy, envy, fear and greed. However, everything is created from my love, so everything is part of me and in its purest form is love. This surprised me, as it went completely against my usual understanding of God and the origins of hatred. My view was always that hatred came from something evil, like the devil. Is this not the case? No, Joshua. Hatred is a variable created from love, and as such, it will be reunited with me in time and become absolute love, as will all things. Hatred will reunite with you? Yes, Joshua. I am all there is and everything on earth is part of me. Therefore nothing can ever truly perish or be separate from me, because there is nothing but me. From me you were born and to me you shall return. It was at this point that I realized how immensely patient he was. A normal person may have grown tired of my constant questions and thirst for knowledge by now, but he showed no sign of losing interest or getting angry with me. Also, I had started to realize that time as we know it didn't exist here. I was unaware of how many minutes, or hours for that matter, were going by, and I had lost all concept of time. When God answered me, it was instantaneous. His answer appeared in my mind the moment I asked each question. There were no hesitations or delays like there would be if I were talking to a regular person. I also noticed a change in my own cognition. When people explain things to me in everyday life, I have to take time to listen to the words as they are being said and process them. I then have to work out whether I understand what I'm hearing or whether I need further explanation on the issue. Even if I fully understand something, it will still take me a bit of time to apply this new information to my life and work out how it benefits me or why it may be relevant, then reply back if needed. However, since there is no past or future in the absolute, none of this processing time took place. Instead, I was asking questions, receiving answers and then simultaneously applying those answers to various parts of my life to determine their validity. All of this happened instantly. As I considered all of this information along with God's previous answers, I decided to further clarify things. So, hatred reunites with you and so do other negative and horrible things? Yes, that is correct. What you consider hatred was actually created by love. Because I am love, it shall return to me in the absolute. What do you mean by the absolute? This phrase was so alien to me. The absolute is my dwelling, Joshua. You may refer to it as heaven in your culture or religion. Is that where I am now? In the absolute? Yes, Joshua. This stunned me for a moment, as I never considered I would get to be in such a place. I was just a normal man, and the idea of being in the absolute was something that was very hard to take in. Also, I assumed that you only went to heaven if you had passed away. Was I dead? I was pretty sure I wasn't, as I hadn't had any health problems or been in any danger prior to lying down in my bedroom. I dismissed this thought completely, as it didn't seem feasible. What exactly is the absolute? I asked. It is my abode. A reality in which things are as simple and as true as they possibly can be. It is your place of origin, and in fact, it is the place of origin for everyone and everything on earth. Anything you have ever known about will have started here. It has always existed, as have you. Okay. Well, earlier you also said you were unconditional love. What exactly does this mean? I am unconditional love, Joshua. Above all else, it is the essence of who I am. Without it, I could not exist, and therefore neither could anything else. It is a love that is endless, timeless and does not waver. During my conversation with God, I asked numerous questions and covered many topics, as you will see in the rest of this book. At one point, I mentioned to him that I would like to write a book about my experience and share it with others. I said something along the lines of, I want to write a book about this experience, but how do I go about doing it? I mean, people are going to need to know more details because it's such a vast subject and they will have so many questions. The people who read this book won't have been with me during this experience, and I can't exactly relay this event word for word as it would be too simple and may not consist of enough pages to make up an entire book. Also, some of the information may not make sense if it is read out of context. How should I deal with this? He told me to elaborate just enough to explain the experience. According to him, too much elaboration would cause me to steer off topic and would be likely to result in contradictions. He warned that given the nature of this book, inconsistencies and contradictions would be the first thing skeptics would be looking for. He also told me that if people saw even one flaw within the work, they may assume that the whole experience was false and thus, it would defeat my message and the purpose for sharing the experience. At the same time, not enough elaboration would lead to many unanswered questions and confusion or portraying God as simply too good to be true. Therefore, this is the balance I have tried to achieve. I gained much insight throughout my experience. However, the one thing God regularly emphasized to me was that He was unconditional love. This was repeated so many times in fact that it started to drive me a little bit crazy. I must assume that this was a key message and that He would like me to stress that here. Therefore, if you take anything from this book regarding who God is, let it be that God is absolute unconditional love. If you hold this to be true, the rest of this book will make more sense. Some of the other ways to define God are unlimited, all-knowing, timeless, and the source of all knowledge, truth and love. God's overall presence had the strength, wisdom and authority one would associate with a male, coupled with the kindness, understanding and love one would associate with a woman. Another characteristic of God was that He was remarkably simple, despite being all-knowing. For every question I asked, He gave a short, honest and concise answer. God responded to each question in the simplest way possible and did not elaborate. I remember thinking to myself, boy, for someone that knows everything, God's not very detailed. I did not say this to God at any point, it was just something I thought as we were communicating. No sooner than I had thought of this though, He replied as if He read my mind. He explained how elaboration could take away from His message to me and ultimately the message I deliver to others through this book. In addition, He said providing too much information can encroach on one's free will. I asked what He meant and He replied I can only provide an answer to a question. If I elaborate, He explained, you will gain additional information that may not be directly related to the question. If this happens, then I am telling you information that you did not ask for or may not want and therefore taking away your free choice and imposing my will. This goes against the laws I have put forth and however benign the result of doing such a thing might be, it is something that I cannot do to you or anyone unless granted permission. As a result of this, I regularly found myself pushing for further answers and seeking out more information one question at a time. During my experience, it became clear to me that God was unconditional love. This was not just because He told me so, but because I felt His love in every fiber of my being. This place God referred to as the Absolute was incredible. The peace and joy I felt whilst there was unprecedented and I wanted to know so much more about God and His dwelling. I began asking more questions and the answers He gave to those were a bit more complex. I thought what God had said so far was inconceivable and nearly impossible to convey to the public. However, this was not, by any means, the climax of my experience. I couldn't prepare myself for what I was about to hear next. Chapter 3, Love and its Variable. I decided that if God was unconditional love, I really needed to know what this meant and its true definition. I had a basic concept of what this meant, but that didn't quite settle with me considering it was the one phrase God kept using to describe Himself. I therefore asked Him several questions regarding this and found out a wealth of information. It is hard for us to imagine such a thing as unconditional love. After all, we live in a conditional world, which means even the largest amount of love we can ever express is considerably limited. God's love can't compare to the love we have for our parents, spouses, or even our children. Our love, however deep it may be, is limited. We may not be too aware of these limits and feel as if we love someone unconditionally, but this is only because we are comparing our love to the other love present within our conditional world. If you compared your love to that of God's, you would realize that it is extremely restricted indeed. Due to the laws that govern our world, we are incapable of completely loving anyone or anything. This makes explaining God's love extremely difficult, as there's nothing on earth to relate it to. Here is the best way I can describe it. Imagine that everyone in the world only loved you and nothing else. All the love that they possess has now been solely directed to you. Now imagine all that love at one end of the universe and God's love at the other. In this analogy, everyone's love for you is not even close to God's love for one person. In fact, they could not be further apart. This is despite the intensity and concentration with which everyone is projecting their love on you. God's love for you is endless. In other words, regardless of whom you are or what you've done, His love for you will never change. He will never judge you or criticize you for anything you do, anything you say, or anyone who you choose to befriend. His love for you is completely unwavering. Everything in heaven and on earth, including you, was created by God out of His love. So everything created is a part of God and thus, is also love. Now, if love has limits in our world, then something else has to exist alone with love to serve as a reference point. In other words, when love ends, there must be something else that to signal that it has ended and to fill up the void that has now been left. This needs to be something that's an opposite of love to serve as a distinguisher. An opposite of love offers contrast and reminds us how important love is. It would help to show us that love exists and would also ensure the world appreciates the importance of love. However, the opposite of love would be the opposite of God. Since God is love and love is all there is, this variable or opposite does not actually exist. It only seemingly exists to separate love from itself and allow us to feel and experience reality unlike that of the Absolute or heaven. The things that fill up this void are created by love, no matter how dark or negative they may seem. Hatred, envy, violence, manipulation and fear are just some of the things that fill this void, but the list is quite endless. Love creates these things to show us contrasts and to help us appreciate love itself. They are an illusion created in order to help us understand true happiness and to bring us closer to God. I believe God's plan for us is to love, experience something other than love, then choose as individuals to love again. The only way God can know Himself is by experiencing one of love's variables through us. For some, choosing to love again is a long process. Unfortunately, many people live their lives in love's counterpart and rarely choose to feel God's amazing love again. On the other hand, most of us are quick to embrace love after experiencing one of its unpleasant variables. I wanted to make sure I fully understood love and its variable. I knew why love had to have an opposite, but I was having trouble understanding how something good could create something bad. According to God, nothing was truly bad because everything originated from love. I decided to ask God to clarify this. God, can you give me a specific example of how something we would call bad is made from love and actually has a positive side? At the moment I don't see it that easily. I mean, bad things just seem bad to me. When they happen they cause pain, suffering and misery among many other things. So how can this be good and created from love? Am I missing something that I should be seeing? Well, the tornado you were in back in 2011 brought much death and destruction to your area. Many people lost everything, and if you take this event out of context, one could easily see why this is bad. But I see the whole picture, and the whole picture is not just about death, destruction and mayhem. Out of this one event, millions of people around the world were united and reminded to love, and that is a good thing. You can't even say anyone died because they are here with me in the absolute, where they belong. The term bad occurs when you take this single event out of context and choose to adopt that feeling without seeing the bigger picture. You see so much pain and feel so distraught that you fail to see the families that are reuniting, the estranged relatives that speak to each other once again, and the husband that in his relief of finding his wife, remembers all the reasons why he married her in the first place. You also fail to observe the compassion, the sympathy, the caring or the empathy that such an event has evoked in both your local community and the entire country in general. Almost everyone who heard of that event at the time would have felt some level of these emotions. I was dumbfounded by this answer because, truth be told, I had never seen this side of things or taken any notice of this. I had only seen the pain, sorrow, resentment and loss that the event seemed to have caused to everyone around me. However, as I thought back on the day of the tornado, I remembered seeing strangers pour in from around the globe to help the victims almost immediately. There were volunteers doing everything from search and rescue to cooking meals and cleaning up debris. There were many positives amongst the carnage on that day. I just hadn't really paid much attention because my own emotions were running so wild. God told me many times throughout our conversation that He is love. He explained that His love is unconditional, unipolar and endless. God also referred to Himself as the light and the origin of all things. However, above all, He is unconditional love. Keep in mind these chapters are a work in progress and are in the process of being revised and edited. This author, Joshua Dale, is currently looking for a publisher. Please check the description of this video for a link to contact him directly.